I am Bill Pearson, Director of Boston Healthcare Fellowship. Welcome to our videocast. Today I'm talking with my friend Patrick Kelly in Augusta, Georgia. Patrick is a primary care physician among the marginalized by day and is a Bible scholar by night. I asked him where his thinking has been about the global pandemic. Could this be a severe mercy for the people of God? This is what he had to say.
The reality of the plagues is something that's been here from the dawn of mankind. While initially the thought was to work through the history of Israel and work through modern Western history and identify the plagues, through each century. Where I've been this week is thinking those are external means: plague, famine, war, the associated economic turmoil that comes from it. That's all an external reality, and it tends to change generation to generation. And I think based upon what the Lord sees that is needed by his people at a certain period, at a certain time. And so rather than focus on the external event, whether it's a plague, whether it's a famine, etc., focusing on why the Lord brings these into the life of his people at a certain time. And that drove me to Deuteronomy 8, where Moses declares to the people that through the 40 years of wilderness, I tested you, as it were, like plagued you, so that I could see what was in your heart. So that I could see and so that I could know what was in your heart. And I think that's more where I've been this week, like moving from the secondary manifestation to the primary reality of God brings temptation, trial, thlipsis in the New Testament into our lives, in the life of every believer at every stage of his life, to find what is in your heart. What is in your heart? That's it. And then, so I can think of it in terms of the 10 plagues. I was thinking specifically of this Old Testament professor, John Currid. He speaks about the 10 plagues as all being the combat of Yahweh against Jehovah, against the false gods. He mentions the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is from the New Kingdom period, which was actually contemporary with the Mosaic writings. So Moses obviously would have learned these being groomed in the house of Pharaoh. And in the Book of the Dead, there's this section called the Papyrus of Ani, A-N-I, Ani. And it's about the death of Ani and his judgment. So he's brought into the halls of judgment, is how it's opened up at his death. His heart is to be weighed against the feather of truth and righteousness. And depending on the weight of his heart, then he will be either condemned to eternal condemnation, or he will go to the house of the living. In this idea that his heart is too heavy, kabad in Hebrew, his heart is too heavy and he's condemned. And this idea that in the narrative of the Exodus, it says 14 times that God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and then Pharaoh hardens his own heart. And when he hardens his own heart, then it sinks on the balances and is shown to be corrupt. And so but this whole idea that, like, sometimes the Lord introduces these things into our lives to show that our heart has been hardened. That's where I am right now. I don't know where I'll be next week, because where I am this week is different from where I was last week.
Well, certainly if your eyes are on your investment portfolio, you're worried. If your identity was going to be on how your March Madness bracket was going to do,
Yeah, but just to think, like, that's where we would have been
that's
now. Like,
we've been consumed with NCAA basketball, and we would have been with, whatever we were doing as a source of our identity and our wholeness. And basically, I think you're right. This test has kind of stripped away everything. We've all been, I think we've talked a lot about, monasteries and the calling to an ascetic life. Well, we're all monks now, right?
Yeah.
We're all called to a life of solitude and quarantine, and we're not doing so well.
It's fascinating. I mean, this is how the church should have been formed and has, for generation upon generation upon generation. This is a tremendous opportunity for the church, like being formed as an individual in, as it were, the isolation of, going into the closet of your heart, right? And then Christ going into the wilderness to pray and going apart to pray. And like, this is all part of the formation in the Christian life, both individually and then corporately, that we're called out of the world, to a kingdom which cannot be shaken, the Hebrews 12 sort of a thing. I mean, there's all these projections of how COVID's going to impact American culture, the political scene, the economy, etc. But I'm just wondering about how it's going to affect the church. I think it's quite fascinating and that it's forcing the church to be smaller. Mm-hmm. So that you actually have to know the people that you're closest to within the church, and then find ways to help and support and uphold and have community with. And our little small group is meeting tonight. It's sort of like a lifeline for people in it, because this is like their one chance to be with other people. And yet when you're with other people, then it's about a different thing. It's not just about what's going on. It's not just about, work and whatever. It's about like it's about people getting together and trying to understand what is happening, right. And maybe and why, and what's our response.
So for a generation that is looking for authenticity, COVID-19 is actually a great gift. We can find out who we genuinely are. This isn't just theory. I mean, you've been impacted with MS and dealing with severe physical limitations as a physician and a father of 3, almost 4. So it's not just a scholarly kind of process, but something that you're living day by day as well.
And I mean, and it has to be that way. The word itself, imra, is a word in the Hebrew that's used, that is the only thing that has been tried. That same word of the trying, the word has been tried, and then the word comes into your heart and it tries your heart, and there's no other way that we ourselves can know whether we truly believe what we said we believe unless it's tested. You have to go through this, and you can't fear it, because what will result is the reality of the truth of what's in your heart, and that will, if you're following the path of the kingdom, then that will refine you more and more and more and more and more and more. So that's not something that we fear and we run away from. Only the Lord knows how you need to be tested, basically. Because I know how I'd like to be tested, because I'd only be tested in the ways where I wouldn't be pressed a lot. Right. When you get tested in really hard ways, then you get pressed to the degree where it actually shows you, oh wait, I'm focusing on my own intellect or abilities or whatever it may be, and the Lord has to break those down to you so that there just has to be the testing in the Christian life, to show what's in your heart, to go back to the Deuteronomy 8 that began the whole conversation.